Hey everybody, it's me, Pixie. Welcome back to my lovely channel. I am joined by the lovely Maxine.
Hello.
My bestie. So Maxine, if you don't know, she actually did an undergraduate degree at King's where she studied linguistics. So sort of the language around clean eating has been discussed quite a lot in media, in the mainstream media especially, and of course in the sort of health blogosphere. But it's mainly been discussed by people who are journalists, health journalists, some obviously nutritionists and dietitians as well, bloggers. But why have we not spoken to a linguist about this? When actually that is the person who is most qualified to talk about language, I would argue. And that is why I brought a linguist with me today.
Woohoo!
Hooray! So I'm all about obviously asking for evidence and all about talking to experts, and in my opinion, Maxine counts as an expert. I think you would agree.
Thank you.
She's pretty damn smart cookie.
I mean, I'm not a scientist, but
you are a linguist, and that is what we need right now. So one thing I've noticed in the media a lot, which I think you've probably noticed as well, is that people are saying that, oh, clean eating has become this horrible, really negative term that it didn't used to be, which I don't think we would argue is quite true.
I'd say definitely not, because, I mean, the word clean, it has those implications. You can't change what clean means. You can't think it. Yes, they will be arguing that it's pure, it's wholesome, but at the same time, that's still, assuming that something else is not clean, that something else is impure, and it's tying these moral connotations to food. And it doesn't matter how you dress it up. It doesn't matter what picture you paint. That message has always been there. It's not new. Restriction, deprivation has always been at the core of clean eating. And all of these bloggers and just people now claiming that it's transformed into something, that's a cop-out, 100%.
It is. I mean, the concept of clean and this concept of purifying yourself and cleaning yourself and cleansing, that's been around for millennia. That hasn't changed.
Exactly.
This whole religious, moral aspect of food has literally been around for forever.
Forever, exactly. And it's just manifesting itself in different ways, and we keep using the same kind of language to talk about food. It's just intrinsically within us. The whole concept of food, our whole understanding about food is based on good and bad. Even in nutrition, there is a hierarchy of foods which are more nutritious and foods which aren't. So
that's just a fact of life.
Exactly. And you can't separate that. You can't pretend that you are not endorsing that if you are saying that certain foods are better than others.
Yeah, I mean, certain foods are maybe better than others, although you could argue about the use of the word better. I mean,
exactly.
You can argue that some foods are more nutritious than others, but that doesn't necessarily make one food intrinsically healthy and intrinsically good, and another food intrinsically bad.
And of course, you've got to look at the bigger picture. A diet is not just one ingredient, it's a whole plethora of things, and how that influences your health, it's not going to be dictated by whether you eat this one particular thing or you don't eat it.
Yeah, exactly. And people who are distancing themselves from the word clean aren't necessarily using very good language otherwise, are they?
No,
really?
Absolutely not. So you'll probably find within the same sort of string of sentences, oh, I don't associate with clean, but I don't touch processed junk, I don't touch rubbish,
Junk.
Exactly. And it's at the very core of it, it's making an assumption. If you're eating junk, well then you must be a rubbish bin, because that's where junk goes. So,
exactly. And it's all these things that are implied. I mean, I don't think they're very often stated out loud.
Implicit, and that can almost make it incredibly severe, because, it's in your subconscious. You can't pinpoint it, but it's there.
Exactly. I had the same issue with clean. I know you pointed out to me that some people have actually used the word dirty with food, but I feel like we use clean a lot and we don't use the opposite, really, which again makes it implied.
Yeah.
But yeah, the concept of junk food is that's something we've been using for a while now, isn't it?
A long time.
Junk food's been a weird one.
Well, I feel like junk food, because again, it's such a strange thing, because junk food is also tied to what you can afford. So if you can afford sort of like really, really nice organic ingredients, that's not junk. But if you can only order, like, you know, get some scrappy apples that are on discount, some people would argue that is junk because that's about to be thrown away.
Yeah, well, I've had someone once on Instagram, and this was a while ago now, but it has stuck with me because I found it so horrifying. Someone I follow, well, used to follow on Instagram, actually called non-organic apples toxic blocks of poison, which is the most ridiculous thing. Why on earth would you say that? I mean, arguing about the pros and cons of organic is one thing, but calling something non-organic poison and toxic, and it's an apple. How can you say that about an apple? I just find it just is beyond belief sometimes.
And I think people aren't aware just how severe it can be when you're talking about food in this way, because it's not as simple as talking about things as good or bad, because it exists in this whole sort of web of concepts. So, for instance, if you're saying that something is bad for you, and you're tying this moral compass to it, then say, for instance, someone is not able to eat incredibly nutritiously, or they just don't, and say that, you know, that's just what's available to them, you're firstly tying that sort of implications on them. You're suggesting they're a bad person. Then say there's someone who's not well, and you can suggest that, oh, if they're not eating well, then they are, you know, not a good person, and if they're unwell, you're essentially suggesting that someone who is ill, who's not very well, is a bad person, and it's down to their poor morals that they are in that shape. I mean, that's just disgusting.
And it just attaches this blame to the individual entirely. You're just putting all the blame on the person and saying that, oh, it's all your fault because you're not eating certain things or you're not eating in a certain way, which is ridiculous.
What a nasty thing to do when you think about it. It's just, you know, you can't pretend that that has changed. You can't try and shake that off, because that's what is being suggested by all of these terms.
Exactly. As a collective, we need to be more responsible about the language that we use around food. I think so, definitely. I mean, I've caught myself accidentally saying things like, oh, a real brownie.
Exactly.
And that's not really the right thing to say either. At the end of the day,
you know, there are people who would eat, you know, they would be overjoyed to be able to have a brownie in any shape or form. And, you know, we can't take food for granted. It is an absolute joy. It's a privilege to some of us. So, yeah.
Food should be a joy to eat. Food should primarily be about the flavour, about the enjoyment aspect, and then, ideally, health and all that should come second.
Exactly.
Really, because if you don't enjoy it, what really is the point of it? Why would you eat something like... I used to eat kale chips because I thought they were good for me.
You don't like kale chips?
I fucking hate kale, so I don't know why. I made my own kale chips and I ate them because I thought they were good for me, and I absolutely didn't. I just didn't like them at all. What? Why? Where is the joy in that?
And that's not a positive relationship to have with food either. You know.
Oh God, no.
Just as bad as the same way as if you're not eating something that you enjoy because you think it's bad for you, then you're eating something you don't enjoy because it's good for you. Really?
Not good.
So what kind of language would you say you would think is more positive then?
I think that we should be focusing on the flavour of food, our enjoyment of food. Call food things like delicious, tasty, yummy, enjoyable. I don't know, use these kind of adjectives to describe what you're eating. Don't use like clean, good, health. Even healthy, I think, is a bit of a tricky one. Because what's to say that one thing is healthy and another thing isn't? I mean, where do you draw the boundary between what is healthy and unhealthy? It's a tricky one because it's a very grey area, and I think
also quantity is everything. Of course,
eating 1 or 2 bananas, fab. Eating 50 bananas in a day, not recommended. Please don't do it.
Doesn't matter how clean those bananas are.
Exactly, they could be the best banana in the world. They could be amazing, but no, eating 50 of them in one day isn't really a balanced diet, is it really? I mean, that's not really healthy. I would say that's quite extreme, to be honest, and I'd say I wouldn't recommend that because you want variety in your diet. And you might even end up, if you eat too many bananas, you could end up with potassium poisoning, which is not really ideal either. So yeah, don't eat too many bananas, basically.
The moral of the story is don't eat too many bananas. Yeah. Don't follow freely.
Fucking freely. Oh my god. Is there anyone in this world who is less qualified to talk about nutrition than Freely the fucking banana girl? Because some of the things that she has said are beyond ridiculous. Are just, I mean, I could present to you a 12-year-old who knows more about amino acids than she does. And just knows more about food and could tell you, you could get an 8-year-old who would tell you that her diet is stupid. And what she says is stupid.
I don't think you need to be an expert to know that, though.
No, you could be an 8-year-old and you'd know that. I really don't understand how some of these people get away with the things that they say. So please don't eat 50 bananas in one day, because I don't want you to get potassium poisoning, and I quite like people to have some variety in their diet. Okay, we are calm. Good, okay.
We're not going to start meditating, though.
No. Listen, I think it's important to get angry about things, it's important to be passionate about things, and it's important to have someone who you can talk about these things with. And this is partly why our friendship is so awesome.
Well, what can I say?
To come to a point, the language that we use around food, we need to think about it more carefully, I think, and we need to not focus on a single thing. I mean, the focus has been very much on clean, which is fine, I guess, but it's not looking at the bigger picture.
You can change the word, but you can't change the concept unless you get to the core of it. And you have to start eradicating the entire moralistic terminology that is within our food discussions.
So really, we're not asking for that much.
No.
But it comes down
overhaul the dictionary.
Yeah, but it comes down to you as an individual, the language that you decide to use to describe your food, and the language that you decide to use to describe your diet and the way you eat, that kind of thing. It's just looking at yourself and seeing how you use these words, and thinking about whether you might need to make a subtle change there to be more positive with your relationship with food.
Because also, your relationship with food does have an influence on the people around you. If you're using these words, that say you've got a plate of something in front of you, you're calling it bad, and the person next to you's got the same thing, of course it's going to have an impact on them. You can't just consider what it means to you. You really have to be reflective of how you're describing food to everyone, what kind of message you're sharing.
Exactly. So it's important to think about. It's not just a matter of clean versus dirty. It really goes much more beyond that, and that's why we feel it's so important to highlight this. Now, obviously, this is just us talking, and we obviously want you guys to get involved in the discussion as well, so please do continue the discussion in the comments if you like. Very happy to discuss anything, very happy to explain anything or make anything clearer, or even just have a little old-fashioned debate in the comments.
Nothing wrong with a good debate if it's constructive.
Exactly, as long as it's constructive and it's not just, oh my god guys, you are so wrong about everything. That is not very helpful. But yes, if you've enjoyed this, please do give it a massive thumbs up. If you want to find out more about Maxine, she's all her info is going to be in the bit below here. And yes, if you want more rants, then subscribe, because there's no way I'm not going to rant, because I love ranting. Anyway, see you guys soon. Bye.